All right, you're live.
Morning, I'm calling the Audit Committee to order on October 21st, and I'm muting my phone beeper. Be quiet. All members of the committee are present with the exception of Alderwoman Pendle Charles. But we do have a quorum, and we have the city attorney just joining us. So I will call the meeting to order, and the first item is to approve the agenda for the meeting. Have you had a chance to review the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next, we have approval of the minutes for the September meeting. And I just want to take a moment. The city does action minutes, but from time to time, we can ask for more detailed accounting of some specific item on the agenda. And I want to thank Kim for what I think is a really good job on the second page of the amendment of the minutes of capturing our discussion regarding the market house. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Seconded.
All right.
Thank you.
Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
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 Ayes have it. All right, moving on to old business. I do have some news on the audit committee vacancy. Thanks to Mr. Cardillo, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with Peter Vale. His resume looks excellent. However, when I interviewed him, I suggested he might actually be a better fit for the Financial Advisory Commission, and that I suggested that he talk to Mr. Sussman and to Jim. And in fact, Jody, I suggested he could even be a good candidate for the finance department director. He really does look great on paper, and he was very personable, very proactive. So he's going to do some due diligence with Fred and others, and then get back to me. Good morning, Rhonda. Alderwoman Pendle Charles.
Sorry, I'm late. I've been trying to get on for 15 minutes. I think it's from my end, but thank you.
All right.
Apologize.
So Rhonda, I was just telling that I had an interview with Peter Vale, who is a potential member of this committee, but he's also a potential member of the Financial Advisory Commission. And that is moving along. And I hope we get him on one of those bodies quickly.
Okay.
But I think he's a really very good candidate. So
Thank you. Great.
that takes care of that item. Next item is performance measures and strategic plans, which would be you, Ms. Buckland.
Yeah, I don't have any updates for this meeting. Should for next one.
Okay, I'd like to set up a time for you and I to get together to go over. I have to admit, I'm somewhat intimidated by the spreadsheet, but I certainly would like to spend some time. You know, this is a particular passion of mine. So if you would do me a favor and set up a meeting time with my calendar.
Absolutely.
As you all have heard me say before, I think having a strategic plan, having a good set of performance measures, and then getting that dribbling down to performance appraisals is an excellent idea. Mr. Cardillo.
Just a question for Vicky. Last time when you presented the massive matrix, I had requested some sort of delineation or coding or coloring to indicate areas of concern, at least to the city manager's office, as the city manager's office manages the process. Our job is not to sit there and meet with department heads and determine if they're meeting their goals. It's to say, oh, these are on track, these are not on track. What are you doing in terms of that? So I had requested some sort of identification or delineation. Is that possible?
Yeah, it is. And that's entirely my fault.
So Harry, I don't know how much you're up to speed on this. Ms. Buckland has produced, I'm sorry, folks, I lapse into first names, but Mr. Huntley, Ms. Buckley has produced a massive online matrix that shows the performance measures for all the departments. We're also simultaneously working on developing a strategic plan for the city, which I hope will start with goals and vision, mission and vision statements, because the last actual official mission and vision statement we have was promulgated in the 2006 budget binder. And then in the strategic plan of 2012, there was a mission and vision statement that was developed by the departments, but never adopted by the city council. It happened towards the end of an administration, and it just sort of, and it's a shame because there was a lot of really good work, including a dashboard that citizens could access that had been developed under that contract. So that's a brief update, but it's something that is back in progress, and I think we're making good progress there. Are there any other comments or questions on this topic? If not, I'll move on to Fraud Assessment Abuse Hotline. Fortunately, the hotline has been mercifully quiet. I don't know whether that's an indication that people are happy with the city's operation or just not aware of the hotline, but frankly, I think it's the former, that I don't think we have any fraud or abuse that should be reported. I certainly hope we don't. Any comments or questions on this item? All right, the next one we go through is the role and function of the Audit Committee. I've not done anything formally on this. I will tell you that there are some exciting things happening, potentially happening with the Financial Advisory Commission. Namely, I haven't seen it yet, but a letter recommending that the city get into acquiring a spending affordability model that will help us look in more detail forecasts for potential revenue increases for the budget. Mr. Cardello has also recommended, and I don't know whether that's in the letter or not, Jim, you'll have to tell us, that we need to be looking at any new programs on the spending side that the city develops, and particularly looking at the out-year impacts of that. And of course, I think the two go hand in glove. I do think that the director, and I'll let the director speak for herself, does look at that. And I do think on the capital side, we have a 5-year outlook in the capital investment program, but these are moves that will strengthen the data if we have the information to support the finance department and the council, since we control the purse strings, allegedly anyway, have a better handle on out years and what's coming. We had the surprise at the state where we're chugging along with all this huge amount of reserve, and then we're $7 billion deficit facing us. So we don't want to be in that position. But anyway, that's a brief discussion of that. But then there is a discussion about how the Audit Committee will be related to that work with the Financial Advisory Commission. So that's the only thread I have for this item on the action on the agenda. Is there any question, comment? Mr. Cardillo.
Thanks. The letter was delivered to the mayor and city council on October 10. I believe that you may be on that distribution list.
Boy.
That's okay. That's okay.
No, I've been waiting.
The city manager received a copy. It was sent on Thursday, October 10th, 9 a.m. at the conclusion of the FAC meeting. So.
Oh my goodness.
That's okay. It's all right.
No, I'll have to look for it. I do not see it. But anyway, good. I look forward to reading that. As some of you may know, I regularly attend the FAC meetings just because I don't have any life to live. So, and they're good meetings, by the way. So, all right, I'll look for that. But that's ancillary to the audit committee.
Yes.
But I think that I've always viewed them as a sister organization, but I felt over time we've been kind of estranged siblings. So we're not really together other than the presence of Mr. Cardillo as a member of the audit committee. All right, on to new business. The calendar. So we have a proposed calendar that I think I know you all received from Kim an email, and it is pretty straightforward. There's 2 dates where we meet on Tuesday rather than on Monday. And of course, we don't meet in August. Have any of you had a chance to review, and do you have any comments on the suggested calendar for the committee? Failing any response to that, is there a motion to accept the calendar for 2025 for the audit committee?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor of adopting the calendar for 2025 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The calendar is so adopted. All right. Where, I guess we don't have a specific thing to take up discussion under old business for the market house. But as I pointed out earlier, when we approved the minutes, we did have some dialogue on that at the last point. In the minutes, and I don't know, Mr. Lyles, if you've had a chance to look at it, but in the top paragraph of page 2, it says Office of Law is to draft an official report concerning constituents' complaints regarding the Market House contract. I believe when you and I discussed it, you said, I need to draft that report. And I think that's correct. And we still have some outstanding items in order to bring closure for a report on this. And I asked Director Dickinson to briefly touch upon that when we get our report from her on the agenda, which may well be the next thing coming up. But it is still an outstanding issue. I do, and then we'll bring to the committee a summary report. I think we're very close, and we'll let Ms. Dickinson speak to this, to getting this closed, but we're not there yet. Next, are there any questions about that from the committee? No. All right, so the next item is new business, and a report from the finance director. Director Dickinson.
Yes, hi. So as far as the office is concerned, we're working on filling vacancies. We have hired our accountants, but we still have a senior accountant position opened, which we thought we had filled. We relisted it because she couldn't come to work for us. And now we're offering it to another candidate, so we hope to have that filled soon. And I'm lining up interviews for the assistant finance director as I get applications in. That's another important position that's opened. And cashiers, we've got applicants for our cashier position. And I'm kind of hoping to bring on somebody permanent, somebody contractual as a backup, because we tend to have a lot of openings over there, and it would be helpful to have backup for them in case either somebody else gets their notice or when they have an absence, we have a hard time backfilling the work over there. So that, and we're working on closing the financial statements out. We're on the final couple weeks of that, but as you know, with Julie leaving, the assistant finance director is leaving after the first week of November. And so that'll be the time the audit is going on. And so we've been holding meetings to talk about who's going to take over what duties in regards to all of our teams. That's gonna be a hard push to get the financial statements out by year end with everybody's workload, and then not having that position filled, but we'll give it a good try. As far as the market house is concerned, at the last meeting, we talked about how I had gotten from Market House a compiled financial statement from their accounting firm that does, that handles their tax preparation, et cetera. So they gave me that compilation report, and it had the revenue and expense activity based on calendar year. And the agreement, the lease is based on a fiscal year, the June 30 fiscal year. So the numbers that I see in that compiled financial statement aren't going to tie exactly to what we have for a fiscal year basis and what they've been reporting to me for the fiscal year revenues. And I looked at the compiled statement, had 2 calendar years listed, 22 and 23. So I took half of each of those years of revenues. And they came, of course, they won't be exact, but they were relatively close to the annual activity that they reported for the fiscal year 23 basis, because that's what I could use. Half of 22 and half of 23 would have been that fiscal 23 report. It was, if I recall, I have to go back to my calculation, maybe about $15,000 difference, which in performance rent, it would have impacted the performance rent. That's 2% of that number. So that calculation, that reasonableness test that I did came very close to what we received from them. So that leads me to believe I can't conclude that anything's off with their annual revenue numbers that they have given me before. As I said earlier, when they're reporting on the fiscal year basis, they're giving me reports from their QuickBooks software, and it's just a list of accounts and totals. So the compiled report was requested by the lease agreement, but the lease agreement assumes it's a fiscal year basis, not a calendar year basis. So I think we're getting there. I don't know what we want to do on the next go around with the agreement to see if we want to try to align those requirements for them more in line with their year, not ours. So it's easier to match up what they're giving us versus what we're seeing in the reports. So that's it. I mean, they're looking right. It was touch and go for a while, and as you know, a couple years ago, we started collecting that performance rent, and the financial information kind of followed, and they showed up early this year in July and ready with their performance rent payment again. So it seems to be going well, and we seem to have all the pieces, just not exactly fitting the way they should.
So would it be fair for me to summarize from the finance department that you feel that they are in compliance at this point?
So not 100% in that the information is not fiscal year based, but I'm relatively confident we're getting the right amounts. They're not adhering to the agreement in specifics, but I don't think it's causing us a revenue shortfall.
So I'll get to Mr. Cardillo in a second, but Mr. City Manager, how do you read this situation, please? I mean, it feels to me like we're close, but I think my sense of what Director Dickinson just said, we're still not fully in compliance. So if we were to write a report at this moment, I think that I would submit to the committee that we've made a lot of progress, but we're not fully in compliance. But that leaves open the question of what's the next step? What are there legal processes? I mean, it sounds to me like they're not performing the requirements of their contract to its fullest extent. What do we do with that?
Is that a question to me, sir?
Yes, please.
Well, we proceed when the administration tells us to proceed. We have a few agreements across the city where the administration decides that it's going to not enforce the agreement. So when the administration determines that it's feasible to enforce the agreement, we'll enforce it zealously, but we have to be directed to do so.
Let me turn to Mr. Cardillo, but then I want to ask for help from the audit committee on what your sense of where we are. Mr. Cardillo?
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question. Which city department acts as the de facto landlord on the property? I'm assuming that the tenant has a primary point of contact of somebody within the city administration.
Well, this is one of the issues with a lot of agreements that have been done in the past by the city. We're trying to correct that particular issue in this and various similar types of agreements by putting in the Office of Central Services, this new department, a kind of a real estate
manager. I get it.
Manager, if you will.
Yeah.
I think that's the intent of the creating the Office of Central Services in part. When these agreements were created, and a lot of agreements across the city that we've done, especially for city property, we do the lease, but there's nobody in charge. So my assumption is that the mayor and the city manager are always in charge of performance on any agreement if it's unstated in the agreement. So it's my thought that with this particular lease, it's the city manager's responsibility. He delegates that to whomever he wishes. In some respects, it may be the finance director with respect to payments, and of course my office when it comes to breach of the lease. But again, we don't enforce breach of the lease until someone tells us to do that. Okay.
So my second related question is, thank you for addressing the issue of a de facto landlord. The second part of that would be then which department is tasked with the monitoring and maintenance of this unique arrangement? Is it the finance department or is it another department? Because catching up on the back rent and the statements and all is a very tedious task for the finance department to do. But is there someone tasked with the monitoring and maintenance of this on an ongoing basis?
If I can interrupt before I get to the other two hands, I'm wondering if, and maybe Director Dickinson, is this not going to become a responsibility for central services? The newly recreated Office of Central Services?
Yes, so that is the assumption, and that may be what Ms. Buckland is going to speak to as well. We think that that function is missing, as I've talked about on a couple of these committee meetings. We have a lot of these miscellaneous lease agreements for various things we're doing, and there's no one central place where they're being monitored, and it does fall to finance and law to kind of keep the pieces together. And when they started asking questions about performance rent, I think that was during COVID. And I had to go in and read through the agreement, go back, put together history, which should be something we're doing anyways. But not even from the beginning of my tenure here, I was not aware of all of the agreements that we had. Some properties that we own and are leasing, not just this one, but others that weren't being closely monitored as far as rent receipt. So we tried to clean that up a little bit. We have a process in place, but as you know, with the staffing issues, is sometimes the general billings for these types of things can be a lower priority. So that is something that we have designated to the new Central Services Officer, somebody to monitor this on a relationship basis so they can see who's in compliance, who's not. And as city attorney stated, we go to them when we feel like we need some legal advice on collecting or we have a problem with the agreement. I wanted to clarify that my belief on this agreement is that we're substantively there, that we're not being shorted, that in all material purposes, they're trying to comply with what we're requiring. I just think our requirements don't match up exactly with what they do. And so we're trying to piece this back together in a way. And I would suggest that when they renew the agreement, that we look at some of those financial requirements and see if they need to be altered a little bit to make it easier for everyone.
Alderman Pendle Charles.
I'll let Ms. Buckland go first.
Thank you. I actually was going to echo that last point that that Jody made, which is that when we're talking about enforcement of a contract, generally speaking, there are a couple of things, at least for me, that I tend to look for. One is there a good faith effort that someone is making to try to engage? And I think that's true in this case. They've definitely been in contact and they've tried. The other thing is whether what we're asking for is both reasonable and helpful. And in this case, I don't think the request we're making is necessarily unreasonable, but I also don't think that it's helpful. Jody's talked a couple of times about how this particular report that's stipulated within the contract does not illuminate their financial position beyond the other kinds of reports that they've been able to supply. And so it's a technical deficiency, but it's not an informational deficiency for us. And so that last point that she made, I think, is really the right one, which is when we go to renew that lease, I think the question is what should be there? Because we're spending a lot of time on meeting the technical letter of the contract. And I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that that report isn't illuminating anything beyond what they've already provided. And so I do want us to keep that in mind. And she is correct. Central services, at the end of the day, hopefully a home for contracts like this.
However, you do raise a sore point, at least with me, which is this council approved 2 consecutive 5-year contracts. So a contract renewal will be at least 8 years out. So unless we want to do something where we reopen with the cooperation of the vendor, the lease to amend it to reflect what you just said, Ms. Buckland, mainly matching up fiscal years may be unduly onerous, and that if, as Director Dickinson said, she can piece together with the information that they can provide us that they are in compliance, that might be sufficient. It might be sufficient for us to get this off of our agenda. I saw you, Tony, but let me ask Ms. Alderwoman Pendle Charles, did you want to follow up with a comment?
Yes,
Please.
yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess it's akin to what Ms. Buckland has indicated, and I'm going to go down this rabbit hole. I'm going to ask Mr. Lyles, with all of what we've discussed, is there a cost-benefit analysis to going back by the finance director, or even when we get to the next entity that will be looking at this? Is it worth it? In looking at what Ms. Buckland has indicated as technical deficiencies that aren't illuminating versus reasonable and helpful. And so I'm wondering, is it worth the cost to do that? And you indicated that you basically, if the administration comes to you and says, we need to move further into something else, doing something else, does that weigh in on the decision?
It doesn't weigh in on the decision for us. We do as we're instructed to do, if it's legal, and we'll file a lawsuit and we'll be in court before you know it. Now the question is for the administration whether all of that man-hour labor or person-hour labor is really the best use of our time, when the difference in what you want and what you're getting is de minimis.
Right.
It's not our call. We'll file suit against anybody for anything if the terms of the condition calls for it, and winning or losing is on the administration to determine. We think we could win in this case, but we'll spend a year tracking down $5,000.
Right, right. And Ms. Buckland, is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, both that I think the difference between what we have and what we want is small, and that they seem to be engaged in a conversation. That I've never had the impression that the conversations with the finance department are sort of in some sense have some flavor of go away boyobotomy. I haven't had that impression. And so there's a certain amount of, if someone's engaged in a good faith effort, I do want to honor that.
The
Yeah, I
other
think
question,
I wrote, just 1 second, please. The words I wrote down is good faith effort. And it seems to me they are in compliance with a good faith effort. And it may be incumbent upon us to reconsider the contract to lessen the burden on both sides. But
one other point I have, or question I have, we're talking about some of these contracts are, I'll use the word antiquated. Should central services be tasked with redoing all of the contracts when they come up for renewal, or even in midstream? And I don't know if that can be done, to take a look at the situations that we're kind of looking at. Is there good faith efforts being made, or is there cost involved that should be looked at? Does that make sense, Mr. Lyles or Ms. Buckland?
In my view, as I've seen these leases, many of them not drafted in favor of the city needs to figure out whether or not it wants to engage in these agreements in a way that's uniform across the board, right? We have a lot of agreements where, in my view, that are political in nature, meaning we'll engage in the agreement with an individual or an entity, and then not care what they do until they do something we don't like. And then you have the lawyers chasing these folks around when we've let them do whatever they want to do for years and years and years and years and years. Or we'll engage in agreements where the terms of the agreements are totally out of whack with our sense of what's reasonable in today's terms. And so we just need to figure out as a city whether or not we care about these leases. And if we do, what's the standard upon which we will engage in these agreements with folks? And when they don't say when they do not perform, are we going to hold their feet to the fire? In many of these cases, we do not, until it just gets so untenable that you got to go enforce it. But we've let them go for so long, we get to court and the judge is going to look at us and say, well, you let them do what they want to do for the last 15 years. Now, why is it so important? So I think when we get to this office that's set up, a total review of all of these kinds of contracts is important to us as the legal arm of the city, to make sure that we're doing these things in the right way, and that we take politics out of it, that we take emotion out of it. The terms of the agreement are what matter. If you want the terms a way that are beneficial to the city and the taxpayer, we're prepared to do that. But we've got to do it in a way that's uniform across all the different pieces of property that we're now kind of leasing out. And that goes for leases of property that we lease as a city, as well as property that we lease to others.
Mr. Lyles or Ms. Buckland, and I'm not going to put you on the spot necessarily, how many leases or agreements would you say that we need to relook at or reform, or whatever word you want to call it? What percentage it could it be? Either number or percentage, loosely.
I mean, I'm not sure. I certainly don't have a number in mind, but I think just as a matter of general hygiene, they should all be looked at when they come up. Even if those changes are not major, you should take the opportunity to make sure that when you come to a renewal, that you're renewing things in line with where you want to go.
I guess some may be more egregious than others, and I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Nobiello.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alderman Arnett. First of all, I agree 100% with the change of the term. It seems like that would alleviate through an addendum and match everything up appropriately. So typically addendums, I don't know how bureaucratic it is with the city of Annapolis, but typically addendums can get generated and pass through fairly quickly. It's just a straight change of the term. Secondarily, it would be nice to have the background of sort of what is the amount of base rent we're talking about, what is the amount of performance rent, just to understand materiality. And then thirdly, is there a chance to even alleviate the percentage rent? I know that's a standard sort of in retail, but if there's an ability to do a smoothing of the averages or throughout a period of time and then just move to a straight base rent, that might make the whole situation even a little more palatable and easy to generate just monthly billing and rent payments. So just for the record, I wanted to chime in on that.
Thank you for that. All right. Ms. Buckland, do we have progress report on how, have we got somebody to do the Office of Central Services on board yet?
Not yet. That's that recruitment is underway.
All right. And do we have this kind of review of contracts as part of the structure that establishes the office?
That would fall within their scope. I'm not. I'd have to go look at the underlying documents to see whether that part is explicitly filled out. But I mean, but generally speaking, they're in charge of facilities, which kind of includes all aspects of facilities. There's not a limitation on that.
All right, let's not tell the potential candidate this is coming. All right, I have Rhonda, Alderman Bindle Charles, is your hand still up?
Yeah, I have one.
Again.
I want to go back to one particular item, if that's okay. If we haven't
Sure.
gotten to the point, you let me know, please.
No, go ahead.
Okay. This may be a good question or the worst question to ask Director Dickinson. And I think I've asked it before, and I'm going to ask it again. Do we do, and I guess we do, exit interviews when it comes to people leaving? I know you've expressed your reason, but I don't know what may be the general reason of others why retention seems to be an issue at times, not only with your department, it seems like, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, or other departments as well, because that might help with maybe recruitment or even how we look at our own department. Some things are out of our hands, some things are out of the director's hands, but just curious.
So I believe there are exit interviews done, but those are done by HR and those are completely confidential. So we don't necessarily get feedback from them. I'm sure we would if there was some major issue that now had to be resolved. I would say that our retention in finance, one, isn't unusual to the industry. Two, people leave for various reasons. Some of them are retiring. Some are going on to better jobs. And some are leaving probably because there's a lot of work to do. And as you know, since I've been here, I've fought for additional staff people. And we have been able to grow a bit, creating a budget staff that used to be done by the finance staff. So we've grown a bit to try to accommodate some of that work, and we're getting there. But the next critical step is office space, because there literally is nowhere to put anybody else. And we're very cramped and in close quarters there. So we're hitting that next step where we're trying to get some extra office space, get it fitted out. And finance was very likely going to be one of the departments that moved there. to spread out, to have some more space, and then decide if we need to do any more fill out of the staffing. I've identified a couple places where we do need more, and I've taken on some contractual assistance in that regard. Because we have turnover from our other positions, there's funding there in the budget.
Ms. Buckland,
So-
did you want to weigh in? Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I'm sure that the assistant city manager, I don't know if she wants to add anything to this. I see it as it's not just one thing. There are several things causing this. Some I can control, some I can't control. And this turnover issue for finance has been something that's been there for years. Before me, it's just the nature of the job, I think. And we even had the misfortune of losing one of our staff members a few years ago. So she passed away. So that it happens for various reasons. It creates a vacancy. We backfill it from somebody inside, then we have another vacancy. And then we do sometimes have people leaving for other jobs, better opportunities, or retiring. So
I was gonna add two things. One is that the official exit interview does happen at HR, but obviously, we have the ability to do our own exit interviews. And I think in general, that's a good practice, is to come into those conversations with an open mind. And obviously people, they're not always going to share, depending upon the reasons for why they're leaving. That's partly why the confidential interview at HR is really important. But to the extent that they'll share with their manager, I think it's a good practice. And the other thing, when it comes to retention, I think there's an all of the above that you sort of have to approach with. There's no one answer that fits everyone. To Director Dickinson's point, we chip away at lots of different aspects of it. Because that's what it takes.
I know we have one department and I think they're training their people too well. That's just a joke. And they are having a really hard retention issue as well. So yeah, for better opportunities. And that we certainly can't hold anybody back for that. That's a good thing.
Right,
Yeah,
so
and I
let
think,
me-
oh no, I was just gonna say, when it comes to that, I've definitely always been of the opinion that you should never hold people back. You should always encourage people to grow. Partly because those folks, they come back to you often, eventually, and that's not a bad thing.
Agreed.
So, let me return to the market house and test with the committee. My sense is that we are ready to write a report, and I propose that I draft that, run it by the city manager's office and the city attorney's office, and bring it back to the committee members via email, and have it as a topic on our next meeting, which is November 18th. I think we've really beaten this horse to death. And to me, my takeaway is that they're substantively in compliance and operating in good faith, that we may want to consider reviewing the contract, and possibly by joint agreement between the city and the vendor, making some amendments that make it easier to comply. And I think that takes care of the complaint. So any comments on that proposal? If not, I think we are ready to have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
All right. Thank you, everyone. All those in favor signify by saying aye, and we will be
Aye.
adjourned.
Aye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone, and I'll